Thank you very much indeed, and welcome to the audience. In the next 45 minutes, we have the privilege of sharing some time with three remarkable companies, three successful companies. And I think that in the education sector, maybe we don't enjoy or celebrate success as much as we could and should do. And certainly in the times we're living in at this point in time, I think that success is relevant to where we go and how we move forward. Are you going to bring everybody in now, or shall I do that individually? I think it'd be good if we could bring everyone in, and then I will basically go around the room. And we have guests joining us from Singapore, guests joining us from going through to Boston, and guests joining us from London. Amazing. I have the privilege of knowing 3 out of the 4 people here, so I have a backstory with each of them, but I'm going to go individually, and I want to start with one of the largest education repositories of learning in the world. I mean, extraordinary organization with experience of disseminating education content digitally for over 50 years. And a lot of people don't understand the heritage of it. And a chief executive who's taken a brand, FutureLearn, from the Open University, developed into an enterprise, raised a considerable amount of money, and has achieved success, which is really quite extraordinary. And I will refer to some backstories of when I was at Apple and with the Open University. But Simon, perhaps you could introduce yourself and give us some background to FutureLearn and your work there, please.
Sure. So thanks, Alan. And it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm Chief Executive of FutureLearn, which, as Alan says, is a company I set up about 7.5 years ago, founded initially by and funded by the British Open University, which has long been a leader in online and distance learning. And at the end of 2012, it was watching what was happening with MOOCs, primarily in the States, and felt it could add something to that picture. So my background was at the BBC. I'm not an academic. I led digital transformation in the radio and television parts of the BBC. And I was in the right place at the right time, able to take on this opportunity. We brought together leading UK universities initially, and then expanded internationally. And now a quarter of the world's top universities deliver courses on the platform that we built from scratch in 2013. That platform was designed to be high quality user experience, high quality content, and with a focus on social learning, because we were looking at a lot of what was happening in learning and feeling that it was very instructivist. And actually, if you could get communities of learners learning together, learning from each other as well as from educators, then you could deepen the impact of their learning. And we stayed true to that through all of our history. And we've been developing that platform ever since, investing heavily in it. Growing the number of courses into the thousands now, moving beyond MOOCs into short courses for professionals, full online degrees, and now micro-credentials, shorter bits of learning that stack into full degrees, but are relevant for you in your job now. And we've become increasingly, since we raised £50 million last year from an Australian jobs market board, who come in as 50-50 shareholders alongside the OU, our focus has been increasingly on trying to target the skills gaps in the world and bridge the educational gaps between those who would love the chance to access high quality education from the world's leading institutions, but simply couldn't dream of doing so without a digital channel. And that was all pre-COVID. And then coronavirus hit, and we've seen huge uplift in the visitors, in the enrollments, and the engagement that we've seen since. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that impact and what lessons it may be lends for the future.
Simon, thank you. If I can then invite Ulrik, it's interesting because from where I sit and sort of the context I put to it, the Open University is one of the deepest resources of education content in the world. When I look at the work that you've done, Ulrik, you've built, well, now for the second time, and I think that's something, a story to be told, but you've built and you're building by far the most intuitive learning environment online, not just in systems and data and reporting, but in the pedagogy and the cognitive understanding of the students. And I think this is, in my opinion, breakthrough technology. We've spoken about it previously. And having built one company and exited to McGraw-Hill, now building the second company and a strength in platform and methodology, please give us some insights into your background and to the work you're currently doing with Area 9.
Sure, thank you. And thanks for the invitation. I'm a physician by training, but I've spent the last 25 years trying to understand how do we make learning that actually works. Not meaning that you get grades or you pass your exams, but learning that works when you really need it. My original interest was how to avoid human errors, but that led to a 15-year detour trying to figure out how to build learning systems that both provides the knowledge necessary to practice skills and character traits and other things, and improving how we learn. But often knowledge gets in the way of that, and that led to this 15-year detour into a very, very strong emphasis on knowledge, which sounds archaic for many people who are talking about 21st century skills and other kinds of sophisticated things like motivation or leadership. But what it has turned out the last 25 years of research in this field is that unfortunately knowledge is often the culprit that gets in the way of actually getting something meaningful out of all the other things we're doing. So it's not a matter of saying one thing is more important than the other. It's being able to handle all the things in integrated learning experiences. We have initially worked a lot with simulated environments, and it's actually a couple of companies before, but we built the current tradition for simulation in healthcare. It was vastly built on the technologies we developed 20 years ago. But what we also realized there were so many other things that needed to be learned. So we needed to think about this much broader, and have the last years after we, in 2014, sold off part of the company to McGraw-Hill, the part that at that time was highly focused on higher education. We worked a lot in workforce development, and similar to Simon, we believe that this is one of the biggest new areas. We don't typically do content. We do it in a few areas. We do build a math platform on our own, but primarily we provide infrastructure for others to build content of this most advanced kinds out there. We work a lot now in research with how do we build integrated infrastructures that can allow you to handle both knowledge, skills, character development, metacognition, meta-learning, all these things in one integrated environment. And I'm particularly interested in how can we build infrastructure and learning experiences where you learn as part of what you have to do anyway. So where learning in the flow of work has been a term used in the corporate education space for a while, primarily meaning that a screen pops up in Photoshop and says, let me teach you something now. I think that there is a much broader application of that concept where when we have to do things anyway, we need to get more deliberate about what we learn from those things that are happening, whether that's in school, whether that's projects in K-12, larger projects you do as you go through higher education. Often our higher education is not based around that, but could be in the future, and particularly at work where we don't have as much designated time for learning as we probably must have in the future, but we probably can find ways to double dip that we just learn more from the things that we're doing anyway. So I'm very interested in everything from early childhood development all the way through K-12 higher ed, and we do a lot of work for different kinds of adults as well, from men in blue overalls who need to learn how to place road signs on highways when they dig a hole, to physicians practicing for their recertification board exams.
Thank you. Next up, I'd like to go to Phillippa. And Phillippa, again, interesting story in a company that I have huge admiration for. Again, as against both FutureLearn and Area 9, you are, I believe, still very much UK focused, but I think you have some areas of expanding the business and going forward. But again, Phillippa, tell us a little bit about MIS and data and the platform you've built over the last 4 or 5 years and the work that you're doing currently around data analytics, please.
Sure, thanks for the introduction. So I'm Phillippa Diath, Chief Revenue Officer of Arbor Education Partners. My background, I began my career at IBM as a Linux sales engineer and then moved into the ERP business and worked a lot in oil and gas with systems like SAP. And then through a period of slightly bored maternity leave, I set up 2 free schools, so new academies under the Free Schools program, around 2013. And during that time, I was thinking about, well, what is the SAP of schools? What is the back office operation kind of system for a school? School is an incredibly complicated institution. And then I discovered that there was such a thing called an MIS system, or a management information system. And around that same time, 2 guys, James and Emil, had started thinking about the same problem from the other angle, which is there's an awful lot of data in education, and how do we bring that all together into a place to make it actually usable by people in many different roles, not just teachers in the classroom, but also parents, governors and trustees, into a single platform. And so they had begun that project, and I had finished my schools project. And so we came together to build what's now a management information system used by 1,112 schools in England, and a few schools in the Isle of Man, and some colleges in the Middle East. As Alan said, we've grown, doubling in size each year here in the UK, or just in England, since 2013. And the reason why we stayed here is because education is such an incredibly complex and in the very kind of benign sense, a parochial business to be in. So the needs of children and families and teachers can be incredibly local. The data sets that you need to adhere to are incredibly local, and we support schools in returning their data back to the government. So every school in England has to have an MIS system. We also work as a partner with the Department for Education, and we're the only MIS system which does this, which allows us to take that data from end of year and exams results, combine it with things like Office of National Statistics, localized deprivation data, and combine that into a set of reports that we produce for head teachers and governors and academy trust leaders for free as well. So we combine these sort of enormous sets of open data with live data that's pulled together in schools every single day, from attendance, attainment, behavior data, through to parental engagement. Did that parent come to parents' evening? If not, why not? Have they been opening our emails? So we very much start from the back office of schools. So again, we don't do content. We do how to remove some of the work, some of the post-it notes, some of the paper spreadsheets from the school office, which is the same heritage as I think ERP systems and CRM systems. So we take the view of the student and all of the pieces of data that sit around them. And typically a primary school might have 13 different applications that the core data sits in, both for students and for staff. And I was interested by the fact that we're in the education and HR group here at CogX, because staffing is obviously 75% of the school's budget, 100% of the school's product in a way is what the teachers do in the classroom. And so managing that alongside all the rest of that data is really, really key as well. So it's interesting to be here with other platforms providing content, because we've done a few experiments before on how to bring together that back office data with the provision of the right information in the right place in the classroom, and actually find that incredibly hard to do. So there's the challenges in these big data platforms when there are such big standards around how the data has to look to be able to share it with the Department for Education, before you can get to some of the more advanced kind of API projects that you might see in other areas. So we're a long way from a Slack for education, for example.
Thank you, Phillippa. Thank you, Phillippa. I think you're stealing some of my thunder and some of my questions, but I'll come back to that in a second.
Okay.
Finally, Karan, who I know less well, but he sent me some very interesting comments, and I'd like to give him the opportunity to challenge all of us with them in terms of the fact that, you know, we've globally been through this COVID-19 circumstances, and leaving aside all the health challenges associated with that, it's had a huge impact both on education and on health technologies, and it will have an increasingly impact going forward. I mean, I asked the question, does the world need another taxi app or another platform for accommodation? Probably not. Does it need innovation, and does it need development in terms of education tech? Certainly yes. But I think, Karan, you have some opinions to make, and one of the things I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your background, but I like your comment about getting it right. So over to you. Let's talk about getting it right, please.
Sure. Just a bit on me. I founded Parthenon, the international education practice at the Parthenon Group, which was a strategy consulting firm. We grew to become the largest strategic advisors to the education sector in the world. We literally advised on every big education deal that happened on the planet for 10 consecutive years while I was in charge. We sold our company to Ernst & Young, so it now operates as EY Parthenon. But then I resigned from consulting 3 years ago, and I now serve as a director in 8 education companies on 5 continents across schools, higher ed, education technology, international student recruiting. I mean, just a few. I'm a director at Green School, which is why I'm here in Bali, actually, but we're expanding globally. It's the world's leading school on the environment. I'm a director at Honoris, which is Africa's largest university company. We have universities in Tunisia, Morocco, Mauritius, South Africa, Nigeria, and we continue to expand, so on and so forth. I'm a director in China's most premium K-12 company. I'm a director at Prometric, which is the world's largest assessment company. I'm a director at Afia, which is the world's 2nd largest medical school company. And so just sort of goes
so
on.
Can I interrupt you a second?
That's my gig.
Can I just interrupt you a second? First of all, I'd like to apologize to you and the audience because I had no idea who I was talking to, which just shows the amount of research I've done into your background. I'm very familiar with Parthenon as a business and hugely respectful of it. And again, I sincerely apologize because I did not know your background prior to this conversation. But given that context and given your global consulting background and your perspectives on this, I would like you to give me some insights into getting it right and some of the other points you made, if you would be so kind.
Well, the way I think about it is education is a fairly broad thing, right? It covers kids from the age of 3 to people maybe until they die. And so when we think about education, I would think that education technology has been quite successful in higher ed and vocational training. And that's where, Open University makes its bread and butter. Area 9 focuses there. And in these areas, I mean, it's sort of on its way, and it's been quite successful. I mean, to take the US as a case study, and the US is typically, not always, but it's typically on the leading edge here. In the United States, you have about 17 million tertiary enrollments. And of those, 2 to 3 million are fully online. About 7 to 8 million are actually kids who are on campus, but they're learning online. So they're sitting in the dorm room streaming their classes, some or all of their classes. And so you only have about 7 to 8 million kids that are not online in any substantive way. So when you look at tertiary education or even vocational education, education technology has proven itself, and to some extent, it's I shouldn't say it's won the battle, but it's made its case, and it's now hard to argue against it. And increasingly, one of the things that COVID has done is it's revealed, it's told the lie. In other words, is an introduction to economics or engineering class at Harvard really that different from a private university in Malaysia or sub-Saharan Africa? And I think, when you look at all the pricing pressure that's hitting higher education institutions because of COVID, that's telling the lie. It means that actually, an engineering class at Brown is not that different from an engineering class at a university in Malaysia, it turns out. It's just that they're priced vastly differently. But regardless, technology has kind of made its point. But it's really in the world of K through 12 education where I think there have been shortcomings and we need to get it right. I mean, and K through 12 education is really important. In enrollment terms, it's 8 to 10 times the size of higher education. And in emerging markets, where I focus most of my work, K through 12 education makes the largest social impact by far. I mean, by far the most learners in the world are actually kids in school in really poor countries. Whether it's India, whether it's China, whether it's sub-Saharan Africa, that's where actually most of the learners on the planet are. They're kids in poor countries. And it's over here where education technology hasn't succeeded. Studies that are looking at what's happened with the move to COVID, it's turned out that even in wealthy countries, even in the United States, it's been a surprise as to how many children just didn't have access to devices. And even when the device access was corrected, there's a study recently reported on by the Wall Street Journal that says even in the United States, there's an estimate that children will lose 30 to 50% of this last school year, even if they attended every online class. So that's sort of data that says, well, is online really doing the job for kids? And the other element of it is, if you look at in emerging markets, in some countries like India, which has the largest school system in the world, by far, about 260 million kids enrolled in school, over half of them are in private schools. And there's this spate of lawsuits happening because parents just don't believe online is worth anything. They're saying you have to give us a refund. We paid for a service that you didn't deliver. Now give us our money back. And so this is where I do think we have to get it right, because what happened with K-12 is that there's a natural adoption curve, but COVID disrupted that natural adoption curve. In other words, it put edtech in K-12, it put it from being a bit of a sideshow right into the mainstream. And it wasn't ready for big time, it turns out. It wasn't ready for the mainstream. And so actually what we're seeing is a lot of learners that don't have a choice using education technology in K-12, but really rejecting it. And I don't think that the case is lost. I don't think that this is a bad outcome for education technology, but if we don't discover how to do it right quite quickly, then we could end up with a very delayed adoption curve. And I don't believe anyone has figured out how to do it quite effectively. Again, in the world of K through 12, so for children, in grades 1 through 12.
You make some very good points. I mean, in an earlier presentation, Professor Rose Lucking was talking about the pandemic leading to the greatest experiment and engagement, and I think it is still experimental. I mean, there's many points to pick up on, but one of the things I'd like to sort of push forward a little bit is that I've advocated for many years that education is not a joined up process. Most education platforms are built for institutions. If you take the challenges of parents, and we have a number of parents on this panel, the challenge of homeschooling in a formal or informal way. If you look at the value of private tuition as a business, it's a multi-billion-dollar business. But isn't there an argument for a joined-up process between the administration of a school, within the teacher in the school, with the teacher facilitating the best opportunity to support the children, and for the parents to be in that journey? And I would argue there's very few platforms that actually have achieved that objective. I certainly know in the work that Ulrik and his team are working on currently, which is, I think, still in stealth. I don't know whether he wants to talk about it, but he shared a little bit with me. That joined up process of B2B to C is interesting. And then the other point, going to Phillippa's side, is how do we deal with trust and data and compliance? So, Ulrik, do you want to comment on some of what you said?
Yeah, I think you're very right that I think there are a couple of reasons to Karan's point about why we are where we are. One of them is that I've being part of the executive team and working across the board of McGraw-Hill's work for several years. It was very clear that in K-12, digital was always an afterthought. It was an afterthought because of the buying patterns and the way we design these systems, that the inertia in terms of trying to benefit from this has been enormous. And I think that unless we change the way we are taking the large part of it seriously, but also realize that needs to have a serious consideration for what is the role of digital there, and not just something the large publishers throw in at the end. I think that is probably one of the most prominent reasons why the area where most have been invested in this is so lacking in terms of digital developments. On the supplemental side, it's been different, but that's not where we're going to change this. We need to deal with the core, the giant highways of education are the very, very big parts of this are still seriously lacking behind. The other side of it is that a lot of the educational technology, unfortunately, in my opinion, does not work. Like, there is no evidence behind most of it. They're not designed based on scientific principles. They're not being measured. They're not being readjusted based on it. They're not being adopted based on it. They're being sold based on great marketing machines, but not based on whether they actually work. And then the other aspect of that is that they were never designed to, in the first place, with the outcomes in mind. They were often a way to say, now we have this technology available, let's go figure out how we can apply that in education, instead of starting the other way around and say, let's start with the educational outcomes we need to decide, we want to accomplish, and then let's figure out what technology could we apply to that. So there are. I'm going
to interrupt you. Just, and again, I apologize. I'm just conscious of time. I'm getting messages through the chat channel. I mean, Phillippa, if I can go to you, because one of the challenges that I come across, or questions that get pushed to me on a daily basis, is about fundamentally trust and compliance. And again, I would have thought with the work you do around MIS, you would be able to share a little insight in those two areas, please.
So yeah, I mean, I think that it was interesting at the beginning of this, the beginning of the crisis, because the volume of data required to understand something as simple as what job does a parent do, and therefore what decision do we need to make about the care offered to their child. Schools just didn't have that data, and yet at the same time they're collecting data on, you would have thought, every single possible point of interaction to do with parents. And the challenge is really that it's not joined up, so it still sits in lots of different places, where in MIS, in a different system for email, and a different system for SEN needs, a different system for child protection and safeguarding data as well. And there's a perception in a way that things are safer if they're kept separate, but actually things are more dangerous if that data is kept separately. I think one of the challenges that we had for years was just even suggesting to school teachers that data stored in the cloud was safe. And there have been, you know, many examples of that being even more risky through this crisis. But I think we have made some progress in at least saying, if you can access a list of the students in your school when you're not in the building, that's probably a good thing, and that's going to allow you to support them more effectively. I think the other thing about trust is being able to kind of trust the quality of the data. So it's not really just the volume, but the quality. And I think particularly around assessment, that's going to be really hard to do, where teachers are not even able to see their children. So making a judgment on how somebody's doing, how a teacher can make a judgment on how a student who was due to do their exams is now going to do. I think that's a really, really problematic question, because you're relying on teachers remembering how that child might have been doing several months ago and making a guess on how they would have carried on, and how you trust a teacher to be able to do that, how you moderate that. That's not a systems thing, that's a sort of behavioral thing. So MISs can provide the place to do that, but ultimately, if you're missing out the conversation, like, there's no system in the world that can replace that.
But that brings me to an interesting point. But the point is, and you referred to a little earlier, is about the blended solutions. I mean, I want to go to Simon, because Simon, you know, you have a relationship with the Open University. That's where you were nurtured from. I mean, people have no idea the size and the volume of that report, that library of access and information. I mean, when we built podcasting, the iTunes U, I don't think many people know, but the most successful university in iTunes U was the Open University. And in terms of engagement, you know, an institution that was built to basically teach digitally 250,000 people in the UK ended up with an audience with over 98 million downloads, a community of over 9.8 million people, and an engagement level which was 86.95% outside the United Kingdom. That's the heritage that you come from. And again, you've built a very successful platform off the back of it. So do you want to give us some context around content and how that fits into this debate, please?
Sure. I think in listening to this debate, one of the things so FutureLearn's focused primarily on adult learning, but we have obviously a halo of audience coming from older school children, entering university, planning for what courses they might do, etc. The thing that always strikes me when I think about the education sector as a whole, and when I hear the discussion on K-12 that we've just had, is that fragmentation point that I think both the previous speakers were mentioning. I find it deeply frustrating. It's fragmentation in terms of the demand, and as a result, the supply becomes very fragmented as well. And everyone's trying to solve individual parts of the problem, rather than having an ecosystem that has worked out how to handle various aspects of data, or has a store of high quality curriculum that everyone can draw from, and therefore focus the interactive teaching on actually engaging with students rather than disseminating information. And
so are you describing what the banks have in terms of their regulation and structure, and they basically manage to manage money on a global basis to what education needs to have in place? Is that where you're going with this?
Whether it's a regulatory solution to drive it, I don't know. I think there may need to be central funding to drive it, and encouragement on both the demand and supply sector from government. But I don't think regulation alone is going to solve it. And I have a horrible sinking feeling that we'd be discussing what form of regulation in 5 years' time.
No, but there's an interesting point here. If I can go back to Karan on this. I mean, one of the questions I had, and I'm not going to finish the questions that I wrote up, Karan, is it local or global? I mean, the point is, we tend to think of ourselves in the UK as being the center of the education world. I would argue perhaps not. We've got innovation going on everywhere. I would argue the innovation going on in your part of the world, certainly in China, Asia Pac, is hugely innovative. And the barriers to adoption are perhaps less in your region or the region you're sitting in currently than they would be in other areas. Do you have a view on that at all?
Well, quite frankly, I think it's comedic if you think a solution from the United Kingdom or a curriculum in the United Kingdom has much meaning in other places. I mean, in South Asia, the main reason why kids drop out of school is it's girls dropping out of school when they start menstruating. Do you have something in the curriculum in the UK to deal with that? I don't think so. And so, the context is so radically different in these countries and in these parts of the world where most children are. Like, this is the important thing. If this is really about social good and the impact we want to make 10 years from now, how's this as a goal? Let's make sure every girl gets to go through school. How about that as a goal? Because if we do that, we will delay teenage pregnancies, we will reduce bullying, alcoholism, even amongst males. I mean, we can change the world just by making sure every girl gets through school.
Yeah.
But to do that, I'm quite surprised. I mean, we don't need a unified best practice cloud-based curriculum. We need to answer really basic questions for parents around why it's important to keep their daughters in school. And that doesn't come from a vast edtech network. It comes from actually dedicating resources to working in societies and communities around what's important and what can make a difference to these people's lives. And so, to me, I think it is very local. Again, I do a lot of work in Africa through Honoris. That's mostly in universities, but I certainly hear the stories that go on even today in sub-Saharan Africa about genital mutilation amongst girls. I mean, it's a horrible subject, but it's something, again, that causes girls to drop out of school. And I'm just focusing on the problems with girls. I could go on and on about boys as well. But these are not things that you solve with a unified best practice curriculum, right? So these are just a couple of local issues. I could even talk to you about why you can't teach math the same way in Vietnam and China. I mean, and again, sitting in England, you might think, oh, they're all East Asians, but they're not. They're different. They have different priorities and different ways of learning. So I think it's hyper-local.
If I can just comment on this, I don't know if everyone saw it, but it's certainly worth going to visit on the CogX YouTube channel. Sir Ronald Cohen, who is a major investor, global investor, was talking about social impact and the fact that social impact needs to be audited. And if we had social impact as part of our development of investment for companies, and we actually showed what we're actually contributing to society, he was of the opinion that that would make a huge difference. And certainly I resonated with his comments, and I think it's certainly worth consideration. I know he has a book that he has written about this, but the points you make, Karan, are absolutely fundamental. I'm going to go back to Ulrik because I know that you have opinions on this. I know that the platform you're building and the work you're doing is about this understanding of the learner, understanding of their impact, understanding of their social care. Do you want to add to this debate?
Yeah, so I think that one of the, probably the second most important conclusion, the most important conclusion from the last 25 years of research is that the culprit number one is that we don't know what we don't know. And it's a very general thing that we're not very good at learning where we should emphasize and where we should attack to improve things, both with our own learning and with others. But the second most important one is we learn much more differently than we ever imagined could be the case. So we need to be prepared to not just deal with boys and girls and poor versus not poor, but we have to accept that there's no way you can find one way that a doctor should work, and you don't want to go to your physician and get the average prescription from the last 10 patients. We need to figure out a way how we establish something where it's more of a mentality and a model to accept that there will be no one way to do this. And the personalization that has been a natural thing in medicine, but it's getting even more aggressive now in terms of precision medicine. I think that's where we will see the changes. And that means that we should be prepared to deal with Karam's area and focus very differently than we do from a high affluency area school in Boston.
Okay, so I'm conscious of time. Can I ask each of you, please, in not so much closing statements, but I'd like you to give the audience some insight to the legacy of what each of you would like to be remembered for in terms of the contributions to the work you're doing. I mean, Karan, I'm going to start with you because I think you started this debate. I think you have certainly a passion for social enterprise. I think you have a passion for correcting some of the inequalities that you've witnessed and come across. I mean, again, in terms of legacy, I mean, having built a very successful business and having moved into the work that you're doing now, where do you see that? I mean, where are we going? What do you want to be remembered by? What impact would you like to leave to the world of education?
Well, I would like to see children from disadvantaged backgrounds have the same opportunity as children from wealthier backgrounds in education. I think that can change the world.
Okay. Going on to Phillippa. Phillippa, do you want to express your consideration here?
Yeah, I mean, in edtech, we can have very lofty goals. I mean, ours is to help save teachers time. And ultimately, if we can save every teacher 10 minutes a day, we can put that 10 minutes back into doing something useful. I think we're doing that, but we'd like to do that at a much greater scale than we currently do.
And going to Simon. Simon, your thoughts on this, please.
I think the mission of our company is to transform access to education. And the thing that really gets me out of bed in the morning is attacking these problems at scale and trying to bring scalable solutions, if not to solve them, at least to contribute to that challenge. So at FutureLearn so far, we've attracted 13 million people to our courses, 3/4 of them from outside the UK, 20% of them teachers or working in education. So you hope having a further impact on many more people in the world. But in terms of my own legacy and ambitions, that feels like still a drop in the ocean if you're to attack that overall mission of transforming access.
And Ulrik?
So we have also, like Simon, I think dozens of millions of students have used the products we've made over the last years, and like 25% did not fail their exams and stuff like that. What I really want to be remembered for, I think, is that we used science. So being a translational scientist who were able to translate science in education, both contribute to new science, but also to translate what everybody else are doing into something that actually moves each kid as much as we can. Because it may not be that it's a realistic thing that we can get everybody to the same level, but it's the delta that I'm interested in. How much can we move a kid? How much can we move an adult? And can we use science as a way to drive that? And can we translate science into real things that matters for real people?
And I mean, taking the four of you and taking your comments, and thank you for those comments, because these are not easy questions, I think. But I mean, given what we've been through over the last 10 or 12 weeks, and respectfully, I'm of the opinion that things are not going to change that quickly. I mean, whatever normal looks like, or whatever the next normal looks like, who knows? But the point is, where does the last 12 weeks impact this? I mean, are we still in the same place we were 12 weeks ago? Have we moved on as individual companies? Is collaboration a priority for all of us? Are we more open to have conversations and debates and perhaps talk about this? I mean, your thoughts, please.
I think it seems to me like we definitely are, just in terms of the number of schools that we've begun speaking to in the last few months, where they had previously said, we really want to change systems, but we just can't find the capacity to do that. And now, you're always looking for burning platform in order to drive a big change like this. Like you couldn't really have asked for something as dramatic, but it has allowed schools to see, like, we can change systems and we can do that rapidly, and actually we have to do that. So I think that will leave a legacy. I think parents will get marginally better at adopting new tools, but it's still a swamp. As a parent who's homeschooling as well, you know, trying to learn how to use Google Classroom at the same time as running your business is a tough job. But the number of parents complaining on Instagram how hard it is to homeschool using edtech is also an interesting thing to query. Like, why has that consumer experience not yet come into any of the classroom tools? And is it because the schools don't know how to deliver it, or the parents don't know how to consume it, or a little bit of both? So I think we've made kind of marginal gain, and we can keep going, but it's going to take time.
I think it's a disaster for the world that we've been through, but it's a gift to changing the mindset about the fact that it's not digital versus human. It's something where we need to find an integrated way to deal with it, and we need to find a new normal that includes digital, and that we're prepared to be able to do this. And it has shown a massive deficiency with it in terms of the tools we have today. We're not even close to being ready for this. And I think that that is the number one thing that this has given us, is we now have an audience when we're trying to say, we probably should try to change this. I think it has given us 10 years of maturation of the thinking that will allow us to work much faster. A lot of us have seen like surges in activities over the last few weeks. And I think that will of course not continue, but I think that the receptivity to having the discussion has completely changed.
Thank you.
I completely agree with that. I completely agree with that. I think it is a paradigm shift for online education. I also agree it's shown up the deficiencies of many platforms and approaches. And in the higher education sector, the immediate rush towards an innovation in remote teaching is something that has maybe got everyone through the first term of disruption, but I don't think will be suitable to get people through the next year or so. To go back to the other thing you asked though, Alan, one of the things I'm not seeing, and I'm disappointed I'm not seeing, is that push towards collaboration. And I'm still feeling that many institutions are going this alone and attacking the same problems individually rather than collectively.
No, thank you. Karan, do you want to add to that?
Only to say that you know, to me, so I was moderating a panel of the 30 leading schools in the United States. So the heads of school of Andover, Exeter, St. Paul, Groton, showed, you know, pretty much all the best schools in the US. And what was amazing is that when I asked them, once this crisis is over, are you just going to go back to how it was? Because you guys, you know, were doing really good. You were really popular, and lots of kids want to come to you. And not one of the heads of schools said we want to go back to how they were. So I think it has given these schools a kick in the pants to do things differently. And when schools like Andover and Exeter do things differently, other schools follow. So the reason why I think there'll be change is not necessarily because we're in a sector full of visionary leaders. It's because we're in a sector of followers. And they will follow the leading brands if those brands change, and they are changing.
Thank you. I mean, I think you make a very good point. May I just, in conclusion, first of all, thank each of you. I did write my own notes because I thought if I'm going to test you guys on this, and I put 3 comments down, which I'd just like to share. And for me, there are 3 components. One is impacting life sciences and the dissemination of research. I think that is a key area, and building authentic content and trusted networks, because Google is an advertising platform, not an education platform. The second point I want to make is around teacher CPD. I think teacher training and digital engagement is key. If we want to improve schools, we have to improve the ability and capability of the teachers, and certainly extending teaching and learning beyond the classroom. The question needs to be asked and answered is, where does learning happen? I'm not convinced it happens in the classroom on a daily basis. And the third one, I think, is a very personal note, is that I want to work on and impact the learning journey for each student. And whether that student is 3 years of age or 83 of age, going to Karen's point, I think is key. I think we're all on a learning journey, certainly speaking for myself. And I think each of us have a responsibility to support that learning journey and to support the engagement for students on a global basis. Thank you all, really appreciate your time, and invite everyone to come to the next session where we'll answer some questions that we have already in the feed. Thank you again.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.